Today on the show, we have Rod Adams. This was a fascinating conversation, one of the probably the most intense education I've received about nuclear energy ever. So it was very fun for me. Rod is the founder or one of the founders of Nucleation Capital. They're a VC fund that invests in advanced nuclear solutions. Before starting Nuclear Capital, Rod spent decades as a naval officer advancing nuclear technology inside the Navy. He did take a few breaks that we speak about, dabbled in the startup industry, and also in academia in teaching. In the conversation, like I mentioned, we do go over Rod's experience because I think it's very interesting to learn about how people gain the expertise that he has and end up in the place in life that he is. But mostly we run through several of the companies in their portfolio, why they invested in them, and what is novel about their approaches to nuclear technology. So if you are a novice like me in advanced nuclear technology, then this is a great conversation for you. It's very educational. And Rod is very, very kind in his explanations, all things that I go over and detail more thoroughly in my newsletter that is available to subscribe to at earthonward.com. Thank you, as always, to Clean Tech Growth Lab. If you're looking to grow in the clean tech space, these are the people to work with. I love working with them. They are wonderful people. And shout out, as always, to the producer of this podcast, Craze and Friends. If you're looking to grow in any other industry, they are the people to do it with. And with that, I bring you Rod Adams. Rod, welcome.
How you doing, Blake? Good to meet you.
I'm doing so good, just like I was telling you right before we got into this episode. I think the things that I've read, things that I've heard, things that you've been saying for a long time, very awesome, interesting, educational perspectives on what's going on in the world as it relates to energy. But for anyone that doesn't know yet, if you could give a brief introduction of yourself and what you're building.
Sure. My name is Rod Adams. I have an alternative identity on the internet that's been there since 1991. I'm known as Atomic Rod because I'm interested in all things atomic and have been for a very long time. Was a Navy nuclear officer, served on submarines for a number of years, and then served at the Navy headquarters supporting submarines. Was always very interested in nuclear energy. Even took a small break in my Navy career. It turned out to be about a 6 year break of active duty stints, where I tried to start a small modular reactor company in 1993. The company is called Adams Atomic Engines. And our concept was that reactors didn't have to be big to be powerful. They didn't have to be huge and didn't have to produce enough power for a city of 1 million when there were places where 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000 people needed power. So small reactors have always been something of interest to me, more to broaden the uh, catalog of available options because there's so many energy customers in the world, and
Hmm.
only a very small portion of those energy customers buy giant power plants of any kind.
So then I guess do you go by Rod or Atomic Rod these days?
Oh, I go by Rod. Atomic Rod is just who I am online. Although, even there, I put my real name. I've always been operating on my real name, never really hiding behind any aliases.
Got it,
Um,
got it, got it. No,
and
good, good. Well, so the first thing that comes to my mind before we get into the, um, um, all the work that you've done, I guess, inside the Navy, after the Navy, since then, is where did this interest in the atomic universe, the atomic world, come from?
well, I first learned about nuclear energy when my dad came home from work one day and said, "Hey, Rod, my company's building this new power plant that doesn't even need smokestacks." He was an electrical engineer. We're Flip Power Company, electric utility company, and I've been to several power plants uh, for his company. I've seen the coal piles. I've seen the big smokestacks. I'd even played below the smokestacks of a power plant called the Cutler plant, where they held their annual company picnic. But that fascinated me. I was 8 at the time, by the way. Later on, I learned how concentrated nuclear fission is, where a little fuel pellet the size of the tip of my pinky can contain enough energy, contain equivalent energy to either a ton of coal, 147 gallons of diesel fuel, or 17,000 cubic feet of natural gas in that tiny little pellet. And then I experienced it personally when I was on board a submarine. And a reactor where the fuel source, the reactor core itself, was only about the size that would fit underneath a decent sized office desk. And it powered the submarine, 9,000-ton submarine, for 14 years without refueling and produced everything we needed. It produced propulsion. The ship could go pretty fast in the water. I can't tell you how fast, but it'd go pretty fast. It could produce water out of salt water. It could even produce new oxygenated air out of water by splitting the hydrogen and oxygen. We had hydrogen generators on board the boat, although we didn't really want the hydrogen. We threw that away. We kept the oxygen because that's what we really wanted.
Mm.
But that to me, that was just incredible. And I'm a child of the 70s. That's when I grew up. That's when I came of age. Energy was an incredibly important topic for the whole country, maybe even the whole world. But we had two major oil crises, two times when our way of life was being directed by the need for energy and access to energy. So that was what initially got me interested in studying nuclear energy because it seemed to me to be a real way to get away from being completely dependent on the suppliers of oil. Now, I like oil, I like gasoline. I love to drive cars, I drive boats, all kinds of reasons why I think oil and gas has been a great boon to mankind. But being dependent on them as our only source of motive energy or as
Sure.
our only source of electricity, that was not a good thing. So nuclear was hot when I was going to school, and it was hot even though by the time I finished my obligated service for the Navy, most building had kind of stopped because I would have been leaving the Navy initially if I left right away. It would have been 1986. By that time, there hadn't been new orders in half a dozen years, and there was no real growth being forecast for the commercial nuclear industry. But that didn't stop. I mean, I still was fascinated.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So then, how is it that I mean, you just alluded to it, just a little bit more context to your personal journey. So you said there was a period of obligated service. How was it that your experience in the Navy supported or expanded, built on top of this interest,
Hmm.
um, in that sector? Because you said that uh, it was formed during these the coming of age. So I assume like by the time you went into the Navy, you had already decided a direction. So how did they support you in that?
Yeah. Well, I went to the Naval Academy um, for many reasons, but one of the main reasons was I wanted to study nuclear engineering. And I told my high school guidance counselor that. He
Okay,
said, well, if you want to study nuclear, the people who do it best in the world are the U.S. Navy.
got it.
And he said, and they operate this school that you can go to for free. Okay, that sounded good to me. So I went to the Naval Academy,
It
had a
does.
good education, good science and technical education. At the time of my progress to the Naval Academy, I went to visit with Admiral Rickover to convince him that I could be on his team. He accepted me, and so then I went into the Navy nuclear program. That's what I was talking about, the obligated service. When you graduate from the academy, you have a 5-year obligation to pay back the education that the taxpayers have
Sure.
generously provided to you. Uh, I didn't. I always thought of it as a guaranteed job. Um, so during that first 5 years is when I went to sea on submarines a number of times. I think I did five. Well, I did about 6 deployments on subs during the first 5 years, and then did another 5 deployments after that.
Gotcha.
So, but going to sea on submarines is one of the things that reinforces the magic. I mean, if you know about energy and about what it takes to drive a diesel engine or those kinds of things, and you realize how polluting they are and how much fuel they burn and how much logistics is involved in bringing that fuel to a ship or whatever. And then you compare that to what you have on a nuclear ship with everything self-contained, with the ability to take hot showers whenever you want to, with the ability to, and of course we did limit that, but it was only mainly to
Yeah.
keep the sailors thinking that they were really on a ship. We could have made, we had plenty of fresh water, um, and certainly plenty of heat, rejected heat we could use. So it just reminded me what the magic was. And when I finished my submarining days, I'd gone to shore duty. This now was about the 9 or 10 year point in my career. I went to shore duty at the Naval Academy about the same time as the U.S. was fighting yet another war over oil in the Persian Gulf War #1. A lot of my friends who I'd gone to school with or served with were in the Arabian Gulf and were fighting, uh, going into Iraq. In part of the 100-hour war that we had where we pushed Saddam Hussein out, that kind of stuff. But during that period, the importance of oil again was brought to everybody's attention,
Sure.
and the idea that, and all of that caused a pretty significant jump in the price of oil and natural gas.
Yeah.
And that was when I started my research to say, is there a better way? Are there sources of ways to produce smaller, simpler reactors that would
Sure.
find customers rather than having reactors that nobody wanted to buy? I mean, we knew how to build reactors. We built 100 of them or more, and but nobody was buying them.
Mm.
If you have a product that there aren't any customers for, you got the wrong product.
Yep.
So that's when I started figuring out, trying to decide if there was a better product, there was a better way to package this magical stuff. And of course, being a submariner, many of the things that people say about nuclear, I know are wrong because I've seen it with my own eyes. Now, I can't necessarily tell you exactly how I know, and I can't give you a chapter and verse, but I can testify that nuclear fission power plants don't have to be inflexible. They can be really flexible and really responsive. Trust me. You wouldn't design a ship if the engine had to run at the same speed all the time.
Yeah. So you just mentioned this goes into the chapter of your life where you took a break and then built that company. Can you take us into the journey that you had with that?
Well, I didn't really build it very far. I never will try to claim that I built a company.
Okay.
We had a few people. We, made a few pitches, made a lot of pitches,
Yeah.
had some interest, created a website, that kind of stuff. Never really got a whole lot of capital, other than friends and family. And fortunately, they still talk to me, but it wasn't a very great experience for them.
Okay, gotcha. Well, so then, just to cap this off, so from the experience of leaving that project up until
Hmm.
you started Nucleation Capital, what was it that you were involved
Well, that's a long journey because uh, Adam's atomic engines actually went through several phases. At about 1995, 96, we put it to sleep. And I had to go do something else. And what I chose to do initially was I was asked to go manage a small manufacturing company and become the general manager. I learned manufacturing from the ground floor, literally swept the floors, ran a forklift, uh, did all the scheduling, counted all the materials, ordered the new materials, all kinds of stuff. Worked with customers when they're designing new products, tried to set up, all that kind of stuff from
there?
the ground floor. It was a 25-person company.
Yeah.
I was the only one in the company with a degree, but it was an awful lot of experience and knowledge and hands-on stuff that I learned a lot from in the company. Okay, so that was about 3 years. That was
All right.
J&M Industries. At that end of that period, I had an opportunity to go back in the Navy, which was kind of unusual to leave active duty. I went into the reserves, was serving in the reserves, and there was an opportunity for people who had certain qualifications to come back in the Navy and teach. And that's what I did. I came back in the Navy and taught at the Naval Academy.
That's
And then
great.
I finished up a Navy career. I actually retired from the Navy in 2010. Went to work for a small modular reactor company. Uh, Babcock and Wilcox was designing the M-Power reactor. So I worked for that for 3 years, and that project was kind of hitting the rocky shores, and I left to be a podcaster, a blogger, and a consultant um, for the next 5 years. And by the way, in that period of time, I also had a few grandchildren and
Congrats.
was very busy as a family guy. But you know, I was pretty active. Went to a lot of conferences,
Of
kept
course,
up with a
bro.
lot of people, talked to a lot of people interested in advanced nuclear, and more people started to get into this idea that nuclear has many avenues of entry into the market, and we could build products that could find customers. And
Gotcha.
that infrastructure, that this group started, the Nuclear Infrastructure Council started sponsoring something called the Advanced Reactor Summit. I think they're on like their 15th anniversary. And I went to a number of early ones, and I've been to them
Nice.
several times over the years, where a whole bunch of people coming together and sharing ideas about building reactors with different coolants, with different sizes and different fuel forms and fuel enrichments, and the variety is pretty incredible. A lot of people, say there's way too many, but I say, well, are there too many combustion engine companies in the world? You know, fission is an, as big a improvement to the human condition as combustion is.
Yeah.
Sometimes people say fission is the new fire. It really is that kind of basic foundational difference.
So I think this sets us up nicely because with all that context, which thank you for walking through on a surface level. By the time it came to starting Nucleation Capital, why was that the right move in your mind? You were very motivated. You're very knowledgeable. You're involved in this community, and you said that this is the thing that I want to devote myself to make the most impact in this space. Why is that?
Well, I can't do this by myself. Nobody can. But in this
Sure.
particular case, I didn't even think of it. I was writing about nuclear energy. And one of the things I wrote about was following an event at one of these advanced conferences, advanced reactor development conferences. I wrote about all of the new ideas and said, hey, there's so many new concepts, and people have made it down a certain stretch or a certain part of the path to deployment. And it's time for people to start putting capital behind these companies, to choose the ones that they really think have the chops to go forward with the technology, the team, and everything. And I wrote this blog post. It's March of 2018. And after I wrote that post, I got a phone call.
Hmm.
And the phone call was from Valerie Gardner, who is a uh, investor, very successful technology entrepreneur out of Silicon Valley, very steeped into the whole ecosystem of startups and venture capital and that kind of
Sure.
stuff. And so she called and said, you're talking about the opportunities to invest in nuclear. I've been looking for opportunities to invest in nuclear. One of her first steps in that path
Sure.
was that she and her husband, her partner, ran a registered investment advisory uh, company. They have several $100 million under management, and some of their clients had been asking for portfolios that were cleaner, were doing the kind of work that they wanted their money to do. So it was trying to get rid of fossil fuels in the portfolio. And her partner said, hey, that's easy to divest from fossil fuels, which was the big movement going on at the time. But in order to have the balanced, uh, quantitatively successful portfolios that we offer our customers, we have to find something else in energy because energy itself is about 6% of the economy.
Mm.
So you got to tell me what to put into rather than just take out. If I'm going to sell fossil fuels, I've got to put something in. And her research showed her that nuclear was the thing that could actually replace fossil fuels from many different perspectives. Could do many of the same jobs, could become as big
Okay, gotcha.
an environment, could provide the reliable power. So anyway, so she started getting interested in nuclear, investing in nuclear, and that's where we got together. We
Gotcha.
had a
Okay.
meeting of the minds. I brought my technical expertise and my networks and all that stuff. She has a lot more networks, has the legal background, has company leadership background, and we came together. So we said what we want to do is we would like to invest our resources into advanced nuclear. And since we're going to be doing a lot of research to do that right, we're going to raise a fund and provide that capability to other people and
Hmm.
make it a little bit worth our while and to enable others. And also, we're both driven by not only believing that nuclear is a good thing, but by working to make it
Right.
a successful product. It is going to take effort. There's nothing automatic about it. The
Sure.
capabilities are there and they've been there for a long time, but we have really not successfully built a sustainable or sustaining new entry, new product line coming into nuclear. We
Sure.
built a bunch of very big plants and we stopped.
Well, see that, and that's part of what I think is very interesting about the trajectory that you've laid out, because a number of your experiences in this space from a commercial perspective have you invested a few years into it and then they did not pan out, and so now you guys are in a position where you have a portfolio of companies that I checked out, and the idea is for them to to have lasting impact, and you guys are invested in them because of that. And so if you could, I want to get into any 16 or something of the companies that you have. I'd talk about all of them, but overarching, if you could give an introduction to this nuclear space. When you say advanced nuclear, I know that there are three areas that your website says that you invest in. So if not all of the portfolio companies are nuclear, that's fine. But because the particular interest is nuclear, if you could give a high level of what is happening in the space, like who and what amount of your investments represents the directionality of the space.
Well, the space is broad. It's not easy to cover in a few minutes, but I'll use our investments to kind of illustrate some of the advances that are happening.
Well done.
Okay.
Let's do it.
All right. So one of our investments is in a company called Core Power. Matter of fact, that was our very first investment. Core Power is a company made up mostly of maritime industry professionals, shipping industry, who recognize that if you want to decarbonize shipping, we have a very proven way, well tested, well proven way to produce ships that don't produce any CO2 or other pollution.
Gotcha.
Nuclear, of course. Obviously, we've been running nuclear powered ships and submarines since 1950s. Haven't been commercialized. So what they've been doing is figuring out what it takes to get the commercial infrastructure in place for nuclear powered shipping. And it's a very complicated task because it involves a lot of different countries. It involves international organizations like the International Maritime Organization, the IAEA. It involves port cities in different places because there's no real site involved. You have to move a ship from port to port, so you got to get acceptance in those ports. You got to get insurance. You got to get classification societies. That's what they've been working on. Now, they also have invested in a project called the Molten Chloride Fast Reactor, the MCFR, which is being developed by a consortium in the U.S., partly with help from the DOE, to develop a reactor that runs with the fuel in the form of a dissolved dissolved in salt, so a liquid form. It runs at very high temperatures. And in the case of the molten chloride fast reactor, there is no moderator. It runs on a fast neutron spectrum, which allows it to consume a wider variety of actinides. That's uh, anything from thorium on up into the plutonium and transuranics and that kind of stuff. So heavy stuff that is the long-lived part of nuclear waste or spent nuclear fuel or used nuclear fuel, whatever you want to call the stuff that comes out of a reactor. Some people call it nuclear waste. It's really a high value material because it only has given up about 5% of its initial potential energy. Okay, so this molten chloride fast reactor, plus the building of the infrastructure for nuclear shipping, that's represented by our investment in Core Power.
Mm.
Okay, another investment that we have is another European, and Core Power, by the way, is a UK company. Another European company is called Copenhagen Atomics. Copenhagen Atomics is another molten salt reactor, but they are designing their reactor to operate in a thermal spectrum where they slow down the neutrons. They use heavy water to slow down the neutrons. They surround the active core with a layer of dissolved thorium salts. And as the neutrons are leak out of this central core, it's just a natural part of fission. Some of those neutrons go into the blanket and turn the thorium into, through several steps, turn it into a fissionable material. Thorium is not fissionable by itself, but if you hit it with a neutron, it turns into uranium-233 and can fission. So their reactor is a thermal breeder reactor, eventually, and it is their concept is to have their reactors, the heat source, just the reactor part, packaged into a box the size of a 40-foot shipping container and transportable by truck. Now, that isn't a complete unit. You bring it to a site, you have to put it into a cocoon, they call it, where the shielding would be and where it gets connections to go to the steam plant. So it's not a full power system, it's just a heat source.
Okay.
And those heat sources are 100 megawatts thermal each, which is roughly enough heat to contribute to producing 40 megawatts of electricity. Okay, so they're a Danish company. Denmark is a place where there aren't any nuclear power plants, or even allowed to be any nuclear power plants. So Copenhagen Atomics is going to do their first test unit in Switzerland. Okay, so that's another one. Now,
Gotcha.
another
2 reactors so far, yeah.
yeah,
Two novel reactor technology.
yeah, another one in Sweden, which is a very interesting market because it's a very strong nuclear history, but they also went through a phase where they thought they were going to get rid of all their nuclear plants. They stopped. Now they have set themselves up to be the strongest nuclear country in Europe, at least in terms of growth per capita. They've got a lot of new support programs. They've got a big lending capability from the government to provide low interest loans. So as part of all that stuff was going on, we found a company that we really liked called Blikala. Some listeners, people in the U.S. may recognize or think of Blikala in its old name in the U.S., which was lead cold. Now, Blikala is a Swedish term that means lead cold. That's it. Bly is lead and kala is cold. So the Blikala is got a lead cooled fast reactor. So it can also burn actinides. It can use fuel. And they're working together with some of the other liquid metal cooled reactor companies like Nucleo and Oklo. And so that's just kind of an interesting area. So it's about a 55 megawatt reactor, and they've got some really good prospects for meeting needs in Sweden. Now, Sweden's got interest in large reactors and 300 megawatt reactors, but also a keen interest in this smaller unit that's domestically grown. They don't have any other SMR companies in Sweden.
Okay.
Okay, so now we go into the U.S. We have uh, an investment in a company called Radiant, and Radiant is a fast-moving company. They've got a high-temperature gas-cooled reactor that's packaged in a uh, shipping container. For in this case, the shipping container is contains the entire power system. It's got the heat source, it's got the turbines, it's got the cooling, it's got shielding. All of that's in a shipping container sized box, and it's 1.2 megawatts. So you can see if you package just the heat source, you can put 100 megawatts in. If you package everything else in there, it's maybe down 1 to 5 megawatts is the most you can ever put inside a container like that.
Interesting.
But Radiant is run by a group of people who's cut their teeth in nuclear, working on SpaceX projects to power the lunar surface or Mars, with figuring out how they could power that. They landed on nuclear as being really the only way you could do that. So that's where the SpaceX folks come from.
Gotcha.
I mean, that's where the Radiant folks come from, is SpaceX.
Sure.
Okay,
Gotcha.
so they've got their reactor is being assembled right now and is scheduled to be tested at the Idaho National Laboratory in the first half of 2026. They're the company that's first selected to go into what's called the Dome facility, which is a former containment vessel that used to house the experimental breeder reactor number 2. So that's Radiant. They're moving pretty fast. Another one is a company called Allo. And Allo is also moving very fast. Actually, from many measures, Allo is probably the fastest moving nuclear company by some measures. They were formed just 2 years ago. And since their formation, they've already built a factory or starting to produce modules, and they plan to have their first reactor going critical this summer, the summer of 2026. Uh, their reactor is a liquid sodium thermal reactor, so there is some moderator inside the reactor that they call graphite that slows down the neutrons and gives them better neutron economy. So they're not quite as efficient at burning some of the actinides, but they have other advantages. And like any engineering thing, these choices are all trade-offs. If you want to do a better job of converting used material, you're going to go tend towards a fast spectrum reactor. If you want to do it with a design that doesn't use recycled material but is better at efficiently using existing fuel sources, you're going to go with a thermal source. But so you can see that our interests go from fast spectrum, thermal spectrums, from liquid metal, liquid sodium, liquid lead. We've got molten salts. So there's a lot of stuff going on. You also will notice that in our portfolio, because of the way we're formed, we're a venture capital company.
Yep.
We don't have any companies like General Electric or Westinghouse, because they're not ventures. They're old established companies that are traded on the stock market. They're not private companies that use venture capital.
So Allo, the last company that you mentioned, how big are they looking to make the reactor?
Their reactor they've got a concept called the Allo Pod. And the Allo Pod is a set of 5 reactors that are 10 megawatts each. And those reactors provide the heat for a single steam turbine system. So the steam turbine is 50 megawatt steam turbine with 5 little pods or 5 reactors.
Gotcha.
Supplying the one turbine.
Awesome.
Their test unit will be just one reactor, so it'll be
Sure.
a 10 megawatt reactor.
Okay, cool. Well, the reason I asked is because, first, thank you for running through all of that just off the top of your head. That was incredible. I tried to write down as many of the terms as I could to be able to.
See, in this case, it's recorded, right? So people can play it back slowly.
That's right. You're right. Right. Which is something I will do. I'll write it out by hand again. But so the reason I asked that question is because what I'm curious about is and you're right. This does give a really awesome starting point for understanding the landscape of nuclear. Well, you said it was very broad, at least from what exists in your portfolio, and a theme that I'm gathering so far is that they're very small, that relatively speaking to what nuclear traditionally tries to achieve.
Hmm.
So is that a particular is that so my question about that is that the direction that nuclear is going as a whole, or is it just a focus of your particular fund, in, like a corner of nuclear?
Yeah, and it's not necessarily the only focus that I have or that Valerie has.
Sure.
It's the focus that Nucleation Capital has because we chose to be a venture capital fund. Venture capital needs to have certain criteria, and of course, one
Sure.
of them is they're not public companies. They are emerging companies that have an opportunity for big markets and big growth. Uh, it would be very difficult for me to imagine a venture capital backed company designing and building a large reactor plant.
Okay.
It's just very large capital raise for, I mean, even those companies that are building them today have to go through a very complicated assembly of financial sources,
Sure.
banks and private equity funds and utility companies and consortium and all that stuff to fund one reactor. So that's why, as I went through our
Yep.
choices, they do represent a portion of the reactor system is fairly low. Although, 50 megawatts it sounds really small, big enough for 50,000 people.
Yeah. Okay, great.
So,
Which is
so 50 megawatts is pretty big. And I can't tell you how big my reactor was, but not that big. So
yeah, yeah. Well, so then is it the particular technology, the novel technology, the innovative technology that's being produced by these companies that led you to invest? Was it their application that they're looking to do, or a combination of the two? What is when you were going about and making the investment? What was most important to you? How did you go about that?
it's not driven by the technology per se. It is driven by the team and the vision, and they're working to make the product match the customers that they've identified. Now, each one of the companies that we've worked with have found, or that we've supported, have found particular parts of the energy market and said, these look like they could really use what we could provide. Let's go talk to them and find out what they really need and want. And so there are different business models involved. There are some companies, and I won't say in particular, but there are some different
Sure.
ways to own and operate the plants. There are
Okay.
different ways to sell PPAs and those kinds of stuff. So that whole, I mean, we spend a lot of time doing due diligence. We don't just look and say, oh, that guy's got a cool reactor.
Yeah. Right. Right.
So and it has to do a lot with the team, what their background is, what their skill sets are, how well they come together and work together. Are they the kind of group that's actually going to put something out, or are they going to waste their time in bureaucratic nonsense?
Yeah. Okay. So and that alludes to another question I had about this, which is, in your experience in with these companies and also other companies that you followed and or been a part of, we discussed how these types of companies differ from other nuclear projects, which take decades and are
Hmm.
massive investments, complex financial structures, these types of things. What have you seen to be one of the or a number of the things that get in the way of these types of nuclear companies being successful?
I, I think you said what gets in the way of old style nuclear companies being
Oh, I
successful.
was asking about the new style.
Well, the new style haven't found what's going to get in their way because most of them, their
Oh,
philosophy
that's good.
is this is the direction we want to go. What, how do we clear the path to go that way? How do we understand we need to produce safe reactors and operate them safely and protect the public. We understand that. How do we convince the regulations and the industry and the financiers and everybody else that we are doing that? Maybe we don't want to try to do it the way it's been done before because that hasn't worked. Maybe we don't want to spend a $500 million and create a license application that's 15,000 pages long to address, and try to figure out what kind of exemptions we need to ask for all that stuff. Is there a better way? And there's been a lot of effort made to try to create a better path. And it's been helped. I mean, the U.S. government has done a really fine job compared for our government of establishing the the environment for
Gotcha.
nuclear to succeed. Over the
That's good.
last 6 years, there have been half a dozen bills and they got not only introduced, they were passed into law and signed, often with overwhelming bipartisan support that were aimed at streamlining some requirements, streamlining the processes, making sure that everybody in the approval path recognizes that we want safe nuclear energy to succeed. It's an important part of our national strength and protecting the environment. Now, what do we need to do to help make it succeed without adding undue risk? While we
Right.
still protect the public, and that effort has been going on. So I think that those are going forward. Now, obviously, every emerging company has a lot of obstacles to overcome.
Sure.
They've got to get hiring. They've got to get the right structures in place. They've got to find financing. They've got to make payroll. They've got to do the engineering work to make sure that their products function as designed. They've got to do testing and make sure that corrosion is correct. And they've got to make sure that they understand how things respond under stress and in transients. There's all kinds of things that happen. They've got to build test units. And all those things are going on to various extents within the companies that we've invested. We've seen a lot of what they're doing. Unfortunately, we haven't traveled as much as I'd like to, but we're gonna keep going.
That'll change. That'll change. Well, I think so. Before we get into two of my last questions, two of my favorite questions, I just want to open it up to you to see if there's anything that you feel like is necessary in adding. Because again, from my perspective, being very not as knowledgeable in this area, I feel like I've learned a ton about, at least at a high level, about what's going on in the space. So, is there anything else that you'd like to add relative to what we've discussed that you think would be important?
One of my biggest fears about well, I'll call it the nuclear renaissance, and I think I call it phase two of the nuclear renaissance, or the current phase. It is happening. There's lots of reasons why we need another viable source of power and heat to provide for the flourishing of mankind. But I am worried that there is a risk that there's too much emphasis being placed on data center power demands as the only reason that people are now interested in nuclear energy.
Hmm.
Yes, it has excited people to hear that Microsoft or Google or Alphabet, I mean Microsoft, Google, Meta, are all interested in Amazon, interested in nuclear. And it's exciting to have customers who are very deep pocketed and very technically competent and can recognize and do math and say, yeah, nuclear is a good thing. But focusing on them as the only new source is wrong. I mean, I didn't know anything about data centers when I got excited about nuclear. There's an awful lot of energy out there that needs to be done better. It needs to be, there's a lot of power systems that are either old and tired or just plain dirty that
Mm-hmm.
need to be replaced. And there's a lot of customers out there from metals to mining to um, shipping, all kinds of things, all kinds of reasons why we need nuclear energy. And it's not just about data centers. And there's other customers out there that, given the choices, they'd much prefer to buy power that is reliable, dependable,
Sure.
predictable, clean, abundant, affordable, all that stuff. Okay, so that's my big thing. It's not just about data centers. There's lots of
Good.
other customers out there, and data centers are great, but
Well,
they're only icing on the cake.
no, I'm glad that you highlighted that because a recent conversation that that has been coming up in a lot of the interviews and blog posts has been um, this kind of Trojan horse effect that data centers have been having on the clean tech industry for exactly the reasons that you're speaking to. Is that it's one of the only things that have gotten people that may or may not believe in the energy transition or anything to invest in it and also be interested in it. So I appreciate you highlighting that. So for my last two questions, I know we're over time. And this is I've been very selfish with my questions, so thank you for indulging. But at the right now with Nucleation Capital, what is the biggest hurdle and how is it also an opportunity?
Our biggest hurdle is we really want to grow the fund, and getting people to recognize just what kind of value we can provide has been a little challenging. I didn't talk much about it, but I need to tell you right here. When we started raising money for the fund, the traditional funders of venture capital funds weren't interested in nuclear at all. Almost unanimously, they said we don't invest in nuclear. Some of them because there have been uh, poor financial performance from previous nukes. There have been bankruptcies like Westinghouse and Scana at VC Summer, and of course there's older ones, Long Island Lighting Company. There's the Washington Public Power System. All these financial disasters. So legitimately, good reason to say we didn't want to invest in nuclear because of that. But we weren't going into the big reactor, so we
Right.
still didn't convince them that was different. But then there was some of the VC funders, pension funds, endowments, uh, insurance companies that said nuclear is on our list of things that we don't invest in because it's right between uh, cannabis and weapons, defense companies. It's maybe just above tobacco. So,
Okay.
it's on that list of things, the sin stuff that they wanted to
Yeah.
avoid.
Yeah. Right.
Okay. So what we did was we built Nucleation Capital as a rolling fund using the AngelList platform. And rolling funds allow accredited investors to sign up and invest a regular amount every so often, every quarter in our case. Okay, so that accredited investors are people that have some resources, but they're not necessarily wealthy individuals. They're people that have good retirement accounts or whatever. But they say we want a portion of our money to go into nuclear. And so we have investors that invest as low as $5,000 per quarter and as high as $250,000 per quarter. We would like to find more of those $250,000 per quarter, but we'll take the smaller ones too. We want all of
Yeah.
them to come in and say, hey, we are interested in investing in nuclear. We think
Gotcha.
that nuclear's got a good thing. You guys are demonstrating you know how to pick the companies, you know how to find them. We don't know who to invest in, so we would like you to build a portfolio for us. And we build portfolios. Now, an investor who comes in now doesn't get access to the returns from those other investments I've mentioned
Sure.
unless we invest again in the future. They get part of what we invest in as we go forward. But
Gotcha.
we really believe that we're providing a valuable service to the investors and to the companies that we invest in. Now, one other thing I'll say is that we do offer really generous fee and carry discounts for people that invest for longer terms
Right.
and larger per quarter terms. So
Good.
it is an affordable way to enter into the field, and that's what we would, if we had anything to do, we would be able to write larger checks to some of the same companies that we're already doing due diligence for.
Well, lots of opportunity there. And you're right. Sounds like a hurdle. Also, lots of opportunity. With all of that considered, last question for you is what inspires you?
What inspires me? It inspires me is doing my little teeny part to enable humans to flourish, to enable us to have access to all the clean air and clean water and clean power that we need, and to try to spread that as far as we can. And maybe not everybody can have a nuclear plant, and maybe not every country, but the more of us that use nuclear, the more fossil fuels are available for others.
Nice. Good. Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for taking this conversation all the way to where we're at now. I feel like I've learned a ton. Like you said, I'm going to need to listen again, have played on half speed, take notes.
I don't even
But this,
speak that fast, but I know that what I've talked about is a big fire hose.
yeah, right. No, seriously, seriously, very interesting. If anyone else was inspired to follow along with the journey, what's the best way to do that?
Well, the best way, we do have a pretty extensive website at Nucleation Capital. We have a news, and we send out a newsletter. You can sign up for the newsletter. There's ways there. I have a blog still called Atomic Insights, and I still do the Atomic Show podcast. We're doing those. We just passed 30 years for the Atomic Insights. It was first published in November of 1995. Um,
Congrats.
and the Atomic Show is coming up on 20 years. So, you know, podcasting has been something I've done a long time. It's a great, uh, it's an amazing capability that we've given ourselves to be
I
able to
agree.
talk to good people and share that with the world.
That's right. Well, Rod, thank you so much for coming on. I'm excited to stay in touch, see where you guys go. Um,
Let me
and
just say
yeah,
it one more
thank you
time.
so much. Oh, do it.
Nucleationcapital.com and atomicinsights.com. There you go.
Beautiful. Check it out. Well, thank you so much, Rod. I appreciate it.
Take care, Blake.